picture this. A quiet town. You know, the kind where everyone knows your name.
Yeah.
It's Columbia, Illinois, and life there. It's simple, peaceful, like danger is a world away.
Yeah, I can see it.
Then one morning, bam, the illusion of safety just shatters. A seemingly perfect family. The Colemans, they're found murdered in their home.
Oh, gosh.
Chris Coleman, he's the husband. He comes home from the gym and walks into a nightmare. His wife, Sherry, and their 2 young sons, Garrett and Gavin, brutally murdered.
It's unimaginable.
But there's something else, something that makes this case even more chilling.
What's that?
Messages spray-painted on the walls promising vengeance and punishment.
Oh, wow. This is the kind of case that gets under your skin, right?
It definitely does. And that's where our deep dive begins into the chilling case of the Coleman family murders.
A case that grabbed headlines everywhere, not just for the brutality, but because it peeled back the layers of this seemingly perfect life the Colemans had.
Exactly. From the outside, they had it all. Chris was a former Marine head of security for Joyce Meyer Ministries, a devoted husband and father.
And Sherry, she was a stay-at-home mom active in their church and community. Their sons, Garrett and Gavin, were bright, energetic boys. Everyone loved them.
It really does make you question everything you think you know about people, about your community, even your own safety.
Oh, absolutely. And when you hear about the crime scene itself, it just adds to the horror.
I can't even imagine being the first responder to walk into that house.
Those spray-painted messages, punished, you have paid, I am always watching. Chilling.
And don't forget, this was a small town. Whoever did this, they felt so confident they left those messages for everyone to see.
It's almost like they wanted to get caught, or at least taunt the investigators.
That's a really interesting point. But before we jump into the investigation, let's take a closer look at the Colemans themselves.
Okay, sounds good.
Chris especially. He seemed to be living this double life. You know, he projected this image of being a good guy, righteous, working for Joyce Meyer Ministries, which has a very strict moral code.
Right.
But behind that facade, he was having an affair with Tara Lentz, a cocktail waitress, a former friend of Sherry's.
And that affair, it becomes a key piece of the puzzle when we try to understand the motive.
Exactly. He'd promised Tara he'd leave Sherry, but he was terrified of losing his job at the ministry. They had a zero-tolerance policy on affairs termination. He stood to lose everything: his career, his reputation, his standing in the community.
Wow, it's like a pressure cooker. And then, weeks before the murders, Chris started getting these threatening emails at work.
Targeted at Joyce Meyer and the ministry, but some of them mentioned Chris by name. He feared for his family's safety.
And remember, his friend, Detective Sergeant Justin Barlow, he even installed a security camera because of those threats.
It just adds another layer to this whole thing, this sense that they were in danger but couldn't escape.
Absolutely. But then the investigation takes a turn. As detectives start looking closer at Chris's behavior, they see things that don't add up.
What do you mean?
Well, for one, he never asked how his family died. And he had scratches on his arms that he couldn't really explain.
Those are some pretty big red flags, especially considering what happened.
Exactly. And then the bombshell drops. Forensic analysis shows that those threatening emails were sent from Chris's own laptop.
So the grieving husband suddenly becomes the prime suspect. What's the explanation for that?
Well, the prosecution had a chilling theory. Chris had made the whole thing up, sent those emails to himself to create a cover story, all to set up the murder so he could be with Tara without losing his job.
That's a shocking twist. But was there enough evidence to actually prove it?
That's the question, and that's what we'll look at next time as we dive into the evidence and the trial. So we're back digging deeper into the Coleman family murders. Remember how we left off? Those threatening emails Chris Coleman claimed to receive? Well, turns out they were sent from his own computer.
Yeah, that's right. Totally changed everything. Chris went from grieving husband to prime suspect in a flash. But was that enough to actually convict him?
Well, the trial started in April 2011, and the prosecution, they laid out their case piece by piece. They wanted to show that Chris had planned and carried out these murders to get away from his marriage, start a new life with Tara Lentz, and all without risking his career.
And the digital evidence, that was a big part of it, right?
Absolutely. They used phone records, computer logs to create this timeline, showing that Chris had the opportunity to commit the murders. And remember that security camera Detective Barlow had installed.
The one because of the threats, right?
Yeah.
Pointed at the mailbox.
Yeah. That footage showed Chris playing catch with his sons the night before they were killed. It's chilling to think he could be playing with them knowing what he was going to do.
It's a truly disturbing thought.
Right.
What about the spray paint? The messages on the walls?
Handwriting experts, they testified that the writing matched Chris's, and they found traces of the paint on his clothes in his car, a direct link to the crime scene.
And then there was Tara Lynn's, Chris's mistress. I can only imagine how difficult it was for her to be involved in all of this.
Her testimony was powerful, no doubt about it, and probably really painful. She talked about their affair, their plans to get married, and how desperate Chris was to keep his job. She even said Chris had expressed frustration with his family. He felt trapped by his responsibilities.
It's hard to square that with the image of him as this loving husband and father. But what about Sherry? Did she suspect anything was wrong in those weeks leading up to the murders?
That's an important point. Sherry's friends, they testified too. They talked about their conversations with her. Sherry had told them about her fears, her suspicions.
So she had a feeling something was terribly wrong.
She actually told one friend, "If anything happens to me, Chris did it. It's haunting knowing what happened."
Heartbreaking. But I'm assuming the defense had their own side of the story to tell, right?
Of course. The defense attorneys, they argued that the evidence was all circumstantial. There wasn't any direct proof that Chris committed the murders. They pointed to the unlocked basement window as a sign that maybe someone broke in.
But wasn't there a security system?
There was. But the defense said someone could have messed with it. They also suggested that someone else might have sent those emails from Chris's computer, trying to frame him.
So basically they were saying Chris was being set up.
Exactly. They wanted the jury to see Chris as a good guy, a devoted husband and father who got caught up in some kind of evil plot. But the prosecution fought back hard. They said there were no signs of forced entry. The window could have been staged. And they showed evidence that Chris was the only one with the password to his computer. He had even deleted files and cleared his browsing history, like he was trying to cover his tracks.
Sounds like the defense had a really tough case to make.
They did. And in the end, the jury didn't believe them. After weeks of testimony and a lot of deliberation, they came back with a verdict guilty on all 3 counts of first-degree murder.
Wow. That must have been a huge blow to the defense. And for Sherry's family and friends, a sense of justice, even though it couldn't bring her and the boys back.
Chris Coleman was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The man who seemed so righteous, so respectable, was now a convicted murderer. He would spend the rest of his life behind bars. But there's more to this story. In the last part of our deep dive, we're going to look at what happened after the trial, the questions that still remain, and the impact this case had on the community of Columbia, Illinois.
We're back, and we've been digging deep into the story of Chris Coleman, the man convicted of killing his wife and 2 sons, a crime that really shook Columbia, Illinois.
We've gone through the evidence, the motive, the trial, but even with the guilty verdict, even with him spending life in prison, there are still some questions that remain, questions that just don't have easy answers.
Yeah, and one of those questions, the one that's probably hardest to wrap your head around, is Tara Lynn's. She was thrown into this whole thing. Her life became part of this tragedy.
Think about it for a second. Knowing that you were a part of what led to these horrible events, having to help the investigation testify against the man you were in love with, watching him get convicted for crimes that, in a way, happened because of you, that's a heavy burden.
It really is. And even though she wasn't involved in the murders themselves, she still had to face the judgment of everyone watching. Public opinion can be brutal.
You're right. And that brings up another question. Was the motive as simple as the prosecution said? Was it just about Chris wanting out of his marriage and wanting to save his career? Or was there something more to it, something we're missing?
The prosecution made it seem like Chris was driven by ambition, that he didn't care about his family. But people are complicated. Could there have been other things going on? Resentment, maybe? A feeling like he wasn't good enough? Maybe even some kind of mental health issue that no one noticed?
Those are questions we might never know the answers to, for sure. But they make us think, make us realize that people aren't always easy to understand, that we can't just simplify a tragedy like this.
And then there's Columbia, Illinois, the town where it all happened. This wasn't just a crime. It was like something ripped a hole in their sense of safety. Too often bad things can happen anywhere.
Remember, the Colemans were respected people in their church, in their community. Their deaths shattered this idea that small towns are safe. It forced people to see that darkness can hide even in places where everyone knows each other.
It's a wound that goes deep. It leaves behind fear and mistrust and a terrible sense of loss. But even in the darkest times, there's usually some hope.
After everything happened, the community, they came together, they mourned together, supported each other, and honored Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin. They built a memorial for them, not just to remember their lives, but to show that they wouldn't let this tragedy break them.
The Coleman family murders, they remind us that domestic violence can be hidden, that it can happen in families that seem perfect. that even behind closed doors, things can be really wrong.
In this case, it challenges us all to be more aware, to see the warning signs, to talk about these difficult things, and to create a world where victims feel safe enough to come forward and get help.
If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please remember you're not alone. There are people who care, and there's help out there. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24/7 at 1-800-799-SAFE-E.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into such a heartbreaking case. We hope you'll keep talking about it, keep thinking about it, and never stop searching for the truth no matter how difficult it might be.
And if stories like this one make you think, make you want to learn more, don't forget to follow and subscribe to CrimePod. You can find this on your favorite podcast app and on our YouTube channel. We'll keep bringing you these deep dives into the world of true crime.
Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and always keep looking for the truth.
Goodbye for now.